picture a bitter 1878 winter in Arizona's Gila Valley, where Jeremiah Cole, a man scarred by guilt, stood motionless in the fading light, watching two Apache women collapse in the snow, one shielding the other, her body trembling with a secret life inside. He was a loner, haunted by a past that cost an entire village its breath. They were strangers, carrying memories too heavy for the frozen ground. One choice in that merciless cold would bind their fates, leading to a truth that could either save or destroy them all. Could a single act of mercy rewrite a lifetime of regret? This story's ending has left countless hearts undone. Stay to uncover why. Hit subscribe, share your city or country below, and join us. What happens when the valley's silence finally speaks? The wind howled through the Gila Valley, Arizona, in the winter of 1878, carrying a thin veil of snow that bit like shattered glass. It was late, the kind of late where the sun gave up and left the world to fend for itself. Jeremiah Cole trudged along the riverbank, his boots crunching frost, his breath curling white in the air. He was a man built for solitude, lean, weathered, with eyes that saw too much and spoke too little. Years ago, he'd drawn maps for the army, shallow water trails that led to an Apache village's end. That guilt clung to him like damp rot, heavy and unspoken, driving him to this nowhere place, a cabin tucked in a stone cleft where no one came looking. He stopped dead when he saw them. Two figures, crumpled near a broken sled, half buried in snow that shouldn't have been there. One, older, hunched over the other, her body a frail shield against the wind's teeth. The younger one lay still, her chest barely rising. Jeremiah's hand rested on the revolver at his hip, not from fear, but from instinct. He knew the cost of stepping forward. One wrong choice years back had erased a village, left him with nothing but a cabin and silence. Walking away was safer. The valley didn't care. But the older woman's eyes flickered open, sharp as a hawk's, locking onto his. No plea, just defiance, like she'd stared down death before and wasn't impressed. Jeremiah's grip on the gun loosened. He saw the younger woman's hand twitch, a faint curl of fingers in the snow, and something in him shifted. Not pity, but a stubborn refusal to let the land win again. He knelt, snow soaking his knees, and draped his coat over them. The older woman flinched but didn't pull away. Her name, he'd learn later, was Ishta. The younger was Kiona, carrying a secret heavier than the cold. He carried Kiona first, her weight slight but dense with fever, her breath ragged against his shoulder. Ishta followed, limping, one hand braced on the sled's splintered edge. The cabin wasn't far, but every step felt like a line crossed. Inside, the air was stale, warmed only by a low fire. Jeremiah laid Kiona near the hearth, her face tight with pain, sweat beating despite the chill. Ishta sank beside her, positioning herself like a wall between her sister and the stranger. Her hands, cracked and swollen, hovered over Kiona, checking for life with a precision born of too many losses. Jeremiah fed the fire, the crackle of wood filling the silence. He didn't ask who they were or why they'd run so far on borrowed strength. Questions were traps in a place like this, and he had no use for leverage. Ishta's gaze tracked him, unblinking, reading every move. When Kiona stirred, a faint moan escaping her lips, Jeremiah saw the truth Ishta had guarded, the swell of her belly, a child fighting to exist in a world that offered no promises. The fever wasn't just cold, it was life, hanging by a thread. He boiled water, tore an old shirt for rags, and worked with the steady rhythm of a man who'd patched himself up too many times. Ishta watched, her posture rigid, ready to act if he crossed a line. "She needs heat," he said, voice low, not looking up. Ishta didn't answer, but she shifted slightly, allowing him space, not trust, just necessity. The firelight danced on the cabin walls, casting shadows that seemed to listen. Outside, the wind scraped the valley raw, indifferent to the lives teetering inside. Kiona's breathing grew uneven, each gasp a small rebellion against the cold. Jeremiah pressed a damp cloth to her forehead, feeling the heat beneath his hand. He'd seen fever turn final before. Out here, it didn't negotiate. Ishta's fingers tightened on Kiona's shoulder, her lips moving silently, maybe a prayer, maybe a curse. Jeremiah didn't know, didn't need to. He kept working, because stopping meant admitting the land could still take what it wanted. The night stretched on, heavy with the weight of choices made and unmade. Jeremiah glanced at Ishta, her face carved from stone, and saw something beyond fear. Memory, sharp and unyielding. He wondered what she saw in him, a savior, a threat, or just a man too stubborn to walk away. The cabin, once his refuge, felt exposed, its quiet broken by the faint pulse of lives he hadn't chosen but couldn't ignore. Whatever came next, he knew the valley was watching, and it never forgave a debt. The Gila Valley held its breath as dawn crept over the frost-crusted ridges, the kind of morning that sharpened every sound, the creak of timber, the faint wheeze of Kiona's fevered lungs. Jeremiah Cole stood by the cabin's only window, his shadow long and jagged across the dirt floor. Last night's choice to bring the Apache women here wasn't just a line crossed. It was a debt signed in blood, and the valley always collected. He felt Ishta's eyes on him, not accusing, but weighing, like a blade balanced on its edge. Inside, the air grew thick with unspoken truths. Kiona lay near the hearth, her fever unbroken, her pregnant belly a quiet defiance against the cold. Ishta knelt beside her, braiding her sister's hair with steady hands, each twist a ritual of survival. But when she paused, her fingers lingering on a knot, her gaze drifted to the cabin's rough-hewn beams. Jeremiah caught it, a flicker of recognition, sharp and cold. "This place," Ishta said, her voice low, cutting through the fire's crackle, "sits where hunters rode, where my people bled." Her words landed like a stone in still water, rippling through the silence. Jeremiah's jaw tightened. He'd built this cabin far from those old trails, but the past was a shadow that didn't fade. He didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, he stoked the fire, sparks snapping like accusations. The Gila Valley, Arizona, 1878, wasn't a place for apologies. They were as useless as rain in a drought. But Ishta's words dug into him, unearthing memories of maps he'd drawn, of hoofprints leading to a village that vanished. He'd told himself he hadn't held the guns, but his lines on paper had been just as deadly. Ishta didn't need to know his story. Her eyes said she already did. The day passed in a tense rhythm. Jeremiah hauled water from the river, its surface glazed with ice that cracked under his axe. He checked traps, though the valley offered little game this late in winter. Ishta tended Kiona, grinding dried herbs into a paste, her movements precise, learned from years of outrunning death. When Kiona's fever spiked, her breath turning shallow, Ishta sang, a low, mournful chant that filled the cabin like smoke. The words were Apache, foreign to Jeremiah, but their weight was universal. Loss, carved into every note. He stood outside, axe in hand, listening through the wind, feeling the song claw at something he'd buried deep. By noon, a new sound broke the valley's hush. Hoofbeats, distant but deliberate. Jeremiah spotted a lone rider, a trapper named Amos, his coat dusted with snow. The man stopped at the cabin's edge, asking for water, but his eyes lingered too long on the sled's broken frame, half hidden by brush. "Heard talk," Amos said, his voice casual but probing. "Folks say an Apache been moving through. Trouble follows 'em like flies." Jeremiah handed him a canteen, his face stone. "No trouble here," Amos smirked, mounting his horse. "Hope you're right, Cole." The words hung heavy as the trapper rode off, his shadow stretching toward town. Inside, Ishta had heard every word. She stood by Kiona, her posture rigid, one hand resting on a knife tucked in her belt. "They'll come," she said. Not a question, but a fact. Jeremiah met her gaze, seeing the truth she carried. The valley wasn't just land. It was a graveyard, and every step she took stirred its ghosts. He nodded, not in agreement, but acknowledgement. "Let 'em come," he said, his voice steady, though his gut churned. He'd chosen this fight the moment he carried Kiona through the door. As dusk fell, the cabin's walls seemed to close in. Kiona stirred, her eyes fluttering open, unfocused, but searching. "Ishta," she whispered, her voice brittle. Ishta leaned close, murmuring, but her glance at Jeremiah was a warning. "Stay back." He obliged, busying himself with a loose door hinge, the scrape of metal grounding him. Outside, the wind carried a faint rustle. Not animal, not natural. Jeremiah's hand drifted to his revolver, his pulse steady but alert. The valley was watching, and now it had eyes. The night settled like a noose, tightening with every creak of the cabin's frame. Ishta's chants resumed, softer now, weaving through the firelight. Jeremiah sat by the door, rifle across his knees, not for show, but habit. He didn't know if Ishta's songs were for Kiona or the dead she carried, but they stirred something in him. A resolve, not to erase his past, but to face what it had summoned. The Gila Valley didn't offer second chances, but it gave him this: a fight worth choosing, and a debt he'd pay on his own terms. Dawn broke over the Gila Valley, Arizona, 1878, with a cold that sank into bone, the kind that made every breath a fight. Jeremiah Cole hadn't slept, his rifle still across his knees, the weight of Ishta's chants lingering like dust in the air. Her songs had stirred a resolve in him, a promise to face the trouble he'd invited by opening his door. But the valley didn't wait for promises. It sent its reckoning swift and unyielding. The morning was quiet, too quiet, the kind of hush that hid a storm. Jeremiah stood outside, scanning the horizon where Amos's hoofprints had faded toward town. Kiona's fever had eased slightly, her breath less ragged, but she remained fragile, curled near the hearth. Ishta hadn't left her side, her knife now openly tucked in her belt, its blade catching the firelight. "They're close," she said, her voice steady, eyes fixed on the door. Jeremiah nodded, feeling the truth in her words. The valley's eyes were human now, and they were hungry. By mid-morning, a shadow moved at the clearing's edge. A lone rider, not Amos, but someone with purpose. Caleb Hargreaves dismounted with the ease of a man who owned the ground he walked. His coat was clean, his boots polished just enough to signal power, not vanity. He carried no rifle, but the revolver at his hip gleamed like a warning. "Cole," he called, voice smooth as a snake's glide. "Words out. You're harboring trouble." Jeremiah stepped forward, his face carved from stone. "My land, my business." Caleb's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Apache women, one sick, one armed. Folks talk of bounties, Cole. Hand 'em over, and your past stays buried." The words hit like a gut punch. Jeremiah's role in the Army's maps wasn't secret, but Caleb's tone made it a weapon. Inside, Ishta stood, her silhouette filling the doorway, Kiona behind her, awake but weak. "We're not yours to trade," Ishta said, her voice cutting through the wind. Caleb's smile faltered, but he pressed on. "You're a long way from help, Cole. Choose wisely." The air grew taut, the valley holding its breath. Jeremiah's hand hovered near his revolver, not drawing, but ready. "They stay," he said, each word deliberate. Caleb's eyes narrowed, weighing the man before him. "You're digging your own grave." He mounted his horse, leaving a promise of return, his shadow trailing like smoke. The encounter wasn't a fight, but it was a fuse lit, and Jeremiah knew it would burn fast. Inside, the cabin felt smaller, the walls pressing in. Ishta knelt by Keona, checking her pulse, her face unreadable but her hand steady. "You didn't have to speak," she said to Jeremiah, not looking up. "But you did." It wasn't gratitude, just fact, and it carried weight. Jeremiah busied himself with the fire, but his mind was on Caleb's words. The bounty wasn't just money, it was a call to every desperate soul in the territory. He glanced at Ishta, her strength a mirror to his own resolve, and felt a spark of connection, not soft, but forged in shared defiance. For those of you riding with us through this tale, your support keeps these stories alive. If this moment's got you hooked, hit that subscribe button and drop your city or country in the comments. It's like tossing a log on our campfire, keeping the valley's truth burning bright. Let's see this through together. By dusk, signs of trouble multiplied. A broken twig near the river, a scuff in the dirt too clean to be old. Jeremiah checked his ammunition, his movements precise, born of years alone. Keona, stronger now, sat up, her eyes clear but haunted. "They won't stop," she whispered, her hand resting on her belly. Ishta's gaze met Jeremiah's, a silent agreement. They'd face what came, but on their terms. She began sharpening her knife, the scrape of stone on steel a rhythm that matched the valley's pulse. As night fell, the wind carried a new sound, hoofbeats, multiple, closing in. Jeremiah stood by the door, rifle in hand, the weight of his choice heavier than ever. Ishta joined him, her presence a steady anchor. "They want our names forgotten," she said, her voice low, fierce. "I won't let them." Jeremiah nodded, the ghosts of his past stirring, not to haunt, but to fight. The valley was no longer just a witness, it was a battlefield, and Caleb's return would test every ounce of their will. The Gila Valley's night closed like a fist, the wind hissing through brittle grass, carrying the echo of hoofbeats that promised blood. Jeremiah Cole stood by the cabin door, rifle in hand, Ishta at his side, her words, "I won't let them," still burning in his ears. Her vow wasn't just defiance, it was a challenge to the valley itself, daring it to erase her people's names. Now, with Caleb Hargreaves and his men closing in, that challenge would be tested in fire and lead. Moonlight carved sharp shadows across the clearing as 4 riders emerged, their horses' breath steaming in the 1878 Arizona cold. Caleb led, his polished boots glinting, his voice cutting through the dark. "Cole, time's up. Hand 'em over, or we take 'em." His men fanned out, rifles glinting, their faces hard with greed for the bounty. Jeremiah stepped forward, his silhouette stark against the cabin's glow. "You're on my land. Leave." His voice was steady, but his pulse thrummed, knowing words wouldn't stop what was coming. Inside, Keona sat upright, her hands clutching a blanket, eyes wide but fierce despite her weakness. Ishta moved to her, whispering, "Stay low." She then rejoined Jeremiah, her knife drawn, its blade a sliver of moonlight. Caleb laughed, a dry, hollow sound. "You're no hero, Cole. You drew the maps that killed her kind. Now you play savior?" The taunt struck deep, but Jeremiah's face didn't flinch. "I'm no savior. Just a man who's done running." The air snapped taut, the valley waiting. Caleb's men raised their rifles, but Ishta spoke, her voice clear, unyielding. "You want us? Name the dead first. Name my mother, my brothers, burned in this valley." Her words froze the men, their eyes flickering with unease. Caleb's jaw tightened, his control slipping. "Enough talk," he snarled, nodding to his men. A rifle cracked, the shot tearing through the night, and pain seared Jeremiah's shoulder. He staggered, blood soaking his shirt, the ground rushing up to meet him. Kiona's scream pierced the cabin, but Ishta didn't falter. She dragged Jeremiah inside, slamming the door as bullets thudded into the wood. "Stay alive," she hissed, tearing a strip from her skirt to bind his wound. Her hands moved fast, practiced, as if she'd patched up too many lives under fire. Jeremiah gritted his teeth, the pain a white-hot brand, but he forced himself upright. "They'll burn us out," he rasped, grabbing his rifle. Ishta met his gaze, her eyes fierce. "Then we fight." Outside, Caleb's men circled, their shouts rising over the wind. "Give up, Cole! You're bleeding out!" Jeremiah ignored them, reloading with trembling hands, his vision blurring. Kiona crawled to the window, her face pale but set. "I won't let them take us," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. She clutched a knife Ishta had given her, her pregnant belly a quiet rebellion against the chaos. Jeremiah felt a surge of despair. This wasn't a fight he could win. His blood pooled on the floor, his strength ebbing, and Caleb's men were too many. Ishta positioned herself by the door, her knife ready, her chants rising again, soft but defiant, as if calling the valley's ghosts to stand with them. Jeremiah's mind raced, his past screaming at him to run, to let the women go, to save himself as he'd done before. But their faces, Ishta's unyielding resolve, Kiona's fragile courage, held him fast. He'd drawn those maps, yes, but he wouldn't let this night erase them too. "We hold," he said, voice hoarse, gripping his rifle tighter. The door shuddered under a heavy blow, splinters flying. Caleb's voice rang out, mocking. "You're done, Cole. Your grave's dug." Jeremiah's shoulder burned, his arm heavy, and for a moment, defeat clawed at him. He saw the village in flames again, heard the screams he'd caused, and wondered if this was his punishment, to fail those he tried to save. Kiona's hand brushed his, her touch light but firm. "The child's still here," she whispered, her eyes locking on his. "So are we." As the door buckled, Jeremiah forced himself to his feet, blood dripping, the valley's cold seeping into his bones. Ishta stood ready, her knife gleaming, her chants unbroken. The fight was coming, and it would take everything they had. The Gila Valley didn't care who lived or died, but in that moment, Jeremiah knew he'd face its judgment, standing, not running, no matter the cost. The Gila Valley's dawn crept in raw and unyielding, the kind of light that exposed every scar on the land. Jeremiah Cole leaned against the cabin's splintered door, blood crusted on his shoulder, the echo of Kiona's words, "So are we," still anchoring him to the fight. The night had nearly broken them, with Caleb Hargreaves's men tearing at the cabin like wolves. But the valley, indifferent as ever, had other plans, and its judgment was coming swift. A gust swept through the clearing, carrying a faint shout from the ridge. Jeremiah squinted, his vision hazy from blood loss, and saw a lone rider galloping hard, dust trailing like a ghost. It wasn't Caleb's men. It was Amos, the trapper, his face pale as ash. "Hargreaves is down," he yelled, reining in his horse. "Slipped on the cut rock. The horse crushed him. He's alive, but barely." The words hung in the 1878 Arizona air, sharp and unexpected. Jeremiah's grip on his rifle tightened, pain flaring in his wound. He owed Caleb nothing, yet the valley watched, waiting for his choice. Ishta stepped outside, her knife still in hand, her eyes scanning Amos like a hawk. "Let him rot," she said, voice flat but fierce. Kiona, standing shakily in the doorway, her hand on her belly, nodded faintly. But Jeremiah felt a pull, not mercy, but a need to end this on his terms. "I'm going," he said, voice rough, pulling his coat over his bloodied shoulder. Ishta's gaze hardened, but she didn't argue, only watched as he saddled his horse, each movement a battle against his fading strength. The ride to the cut rock was a blur of pain and wind, the valley's jagged edges blurring into one. Caleb lay pinned under his horse, blood pooling in the dirt, his eyes wild with fury and fear. His men had scattered, their loyalty as thin as the frost. Jeremiah dismounted, ignoring the fire in his shoulder, and worked in silence, cutting reins, levering the horse off, binding Caleb's broken leg. Caleb cursed him, spitting venom, but Jeremiah's face was stone. "You live," he said, "but not because you deserve it." He hauled Caleb onto his horse, the man's weight nearly dropping him, and rode back, the valley's silence louder than any scream. By noon, word spread like wildfire. Caleb's lies, fake Apache tracks, inflated bounties, unraveled when Amos spoke in town, his voice carrying the weight of what he'd seen. The men who'd followed Caleb turned away, their trust in him buried in the dirt. In the Gila Valley, respect was currency, and Caleb was bankrupt. Jeremiah returned to the cabin, his wound seeping, his body heavy, but his choice felt right. Not redemption, just truth. Ishta was gone by dusk. She'd left without a word, her pack light, her knife at her side. Kiona stood by the hearth, her face calm but eyes distant. "She carries the dead," Kiona said, her voice soft. "This place can't hold her." Jeremiah nodded, understanding. Ishta's fight was with memory, her path leading to higher ground, where Apache voices still lingered. He didn't mourn her leaving. It was her right, her strength. Kiona stayed, not out of debt, but for the child in her belly, a life that needed roots, not flight. She moved with quiet purpose, sorting herbs, mending a torn blanket, her hand steady despite the valley's weight. Jeremiah watched her, seeing not a victim but a partner, someone who'd chosen this hard land as he had. They worked together, repairing the cabin's shattered door, planning for spring's grazing. The valley didn't soften, its wind still sharp, its nights cold, but it no longer felt like a sentence. One evening, as the sun bled red over the ridge, Jeremiah stood by the river, the water clear and fast. He saw the spot where he'd found Kiona and Ishta, the snow long gone, the ground scarred but alive. His past, those maps, that village, hadn't vanished, but it no longer ruled him. Kiona joined him, her shadow merging with his. "This is enough," she said, her voice firm, not asking for promises, just stating what was. Jeremiah met her gaze, the valley stretching wide around them, indifferent but honest. The Gila Valley didn't bless their choice. It didn't offer ease. But in its vast, unyielding heart, Jeremiah and Kiona had carved a life, not grand, not soft, but theirs. Each day was a step, not away from the past, but through it, toward something the frontier rarely allowed, a future built on truth, chosen and held fast. The Gila Valley's tale of Jeremiah, Kiona, and Ishta leaves us with choices that echo beyond the frost. What did you feel when Jeremiah stood against the valley's judgment? Share your thoughts below. Your voice keeps these stories alive. Gratitude for riding this trail with us. Your presence lights the fire. We'll meet again where the frontier whispers its next truth. If Kiona's decision to stay stirred something in you, let us know what's worth fighting for in your world. Stay tuned for more tales that cut as deep as the Arizona wind.